In this segment, we're going to take a look at the Renaissance period. We'll look at some of the important historical events of the time, a few major artists of the time, and just sort of get a general view of what's happening in the time period. You'll remember that this is the period from 1450 to about 1600, and that it's a real focus on rebirth and focusing on the here and now in human life. We've been through that horrible period of the Middle Ages. We've had all sorts of famine, death, murder, war, and people are tired of that. So now let's see if we can do something about improving our day-to-day life. This is a period of time where we start to see colleges and universities come into being. Up until this point, education, such as it was for most people, came from church. So you went to church, you were told your stories of saints and from the Bible, and that was an education for most people. You didn't go to school to learn anything else unless you were really well off. So we start to have universities, we have faculty members now, and like faculty members forever after, pretty much, they're not so much interested in the religious side of things. There's a whole church hierarchy that's dealing with that. So the people who are teaching at the universities are focusing on what we now call humanism, or being able to take your own human brain, make some decisions for yourself that were not driven down to you by the church. So the real emphasis was not necessarily to say, oh, religion is horrible, religion is bad, throw it out. It was really more, hey, let's use our brains, let's focus on the things that we can see and hear and touch and make decisions based on the information that we get, rather than just being fed it and regurgitating it. So it's really more about teaching people to think for themselves than trying to throw out anything they might have believed in the past. So that's a really big movement in the Renaissance period. This is a big time geographically. Think about we're in 1450. What happens in America in 1492? Christopher Columbus gets lost and bumps into us. So, we have what we now refer to as the discovery of America, even though he probably wasn't the first one here. And obviously the Native Americans were here first. So that happens in this period of time. We also have the Portuguese, who were big sailors. They went around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. They went around to India. Magellan went around the globe. So these are big things. You think about it, not too long before this, people thought the world was flat. The idea of trying to sail all the way around and come back where you were, that was just completely absurd to most people. And probably even after Magellan's crew came back, and I don't think Magellan made it all the way. I think he died on the way. But these are startling kinds of ideas. Wow, look, we can do this. Spain was busy while the Portuguese were kind of going toward the east. Spain went west to the New World. St. Augustine in Florida, founded by the Spanish. They went on over into South America and Central America and did bad things to the Native Americans there, much as we have done to many Native Americans in our country. So there's a lot of interaction between cultures that hasn't happened up into this point, and we're still not getting much of it back. What did we get back from most of those trips? We got chocolate. They brought back things that were new they had not seen. Chocolate, corn, brought those back to Europe, and that was sort of their whole impression of what the New World or India or whatever was. But it's a new thing. People are moving out, exploring their world. So if you think about the periods before this as being very much exploring your spiritual world, we are now exploring our physical world. Scientific exploration is also really important in this period of time. This is the first time that we really see people studying human anatomy. What makes up our bodies? We can look beyond the outside. So human anatomy is something that doctors and artists were doing. Leonardo Da Vinci, big name in the Renaissance period, he actually dissected 30 bodies, dead bodies, just to see what they were like on the inside. And as we look at his artwork in a minute, you'll see that he really, really understood how all those parts work together. So we're starting to study those things to try to figure out how the human body works. As we go further into history, we'll see that we learn more about the inner workings of people when they're alive, but in this period of time, we didn't quite have that much sophistication. This is a period of time still where astronomy is very important. People believe that what happened in the stars really did have an impact on your life, and particularly in your health. We'll see that even in the Baroque period, that they believed that certain musical keys could affect the way your liver functions. So it's kind of, to us, that seems very primitive, but that was sort of advanced thinking in the Renaissance period. So they would look at the stars and decide when's the best time to do whatever you need to do, medically speaking. This is also the period of time that the printing press is invented, and that is big. That's just a major thing, because now it makes information available to everybody. Probably the next most comparable thing would be the internet, which has made information from all sorts of sources available to more and more people. No longer is the church completely in control of content. Now you can buy a book. If you could afford it, you could buy a book. So that's very important in terms of people being able to think for themselves. Now they have information that they can use to make those decisions. Sort of the other end of that spectrum, they also figured out how to make a cannon safe to be used on a ship. So we have something that's really kind of a good thing here, the printing press. On the other end, cannons on ships are a good thing if you're a warrior, but for the rest of the people on the opposite end of the cannon, it's not such a good thing. But it made it possible for much more naval activity to happen. So all those people who were sailing around, exploring new places, could defend themselves much more easily. So literarily, Shakespeare is in this period. For some reason, many of my students seem to think Shakespeare is either much newer than that or much older than that. But Shakespeare really comes right at the end of the Renaissance period. Many of his plays are written right around the year 1600. You can tell by looking at Shakespeare's plays, whether they're the tragedies, whether they're the history plays, whether they're the comic plays, that he really studied and understood human behavior. And that's really what humanism is about thinking and making judgments about based on what you see. So in his plays, we have all these people to whom things happen, and it's usually their personality or their character flaws that have led them to whatever demise or downfall they might have happened to be. So Shakespeare's a really good example of how literary works would employ our new understanding of human behavior and how it can affect our lives. So there's a very direct consequence of things that happen in Shakespeare, and that's very typical of Renaissance thinking. He also reflects their interest in ancient events. We'll see later that that's a really significant focus, but we're exploring the world now, so we can actually think about things that are older as well. So he's got all those history plays. Of course, we have to keep in mind that yes, there are history plays, but the history is not nearly as far back for Shakespeare's people as it is for us. If you're looking at Shakespeare in 1600 and he's writing a play about some king who lived in the 1400s, that's not ancient history to somebody living at the time. To us, that's ages ago, but it's still relatively new. So Shakespeare could actually sort of condense the stories, although if you've had to read Shakespeare in class and you just thought, oh my gosh, this is so long and whatever, he leaves out a lot of stuff because people in that period of time would have known the stories. He wouldn't have to give every last detail. He could just sort of jump right into the action of the story and carry on from there. Now, a really important concept in the Renaissance period is the idea of a Renaissance man. And we use the word man because women really didn't have much of a function in this at all. But basically, a Renaissance man is a person who is good at lots of things. So it really reflects that whole idea of exploring our world. So you might have somebody whose primary focus is painter. But that painter might also study anatomy. They probably do mathematics. They're probably interested in some sort of science. They probably write poetry. They explore all sorts of different things. That idea, a Renaissance man, comes out of this period. So it's a person who is adept at lots of different kinds of things. And it's not unique to the Renaissance period, but this is where the period of time in which the term was sort of coined. So we see that in lots of the important people from that period of time, including Leonardo da Vinci, who's probably the best known artist from the time. He was not just a painter, he was a sculptor. He did all those inventions, drawings, he was just like all over the place and exploring all sorts of things. So he's a really good example of what a Renaissance man would be like. We know many of his famous works. Everybody knows The Last Supper, the painting that's called familiarly the Mona Lisa's proper name is La Gioconda. So he's a big name in the arts. The other big Renaissance man artist of the time is Michelangelo, whom we could tie together with all of his other Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I'll get it straight here in a minute. Donatello, Raphael, Michelangelo, can't remember who the other one was. All those turtles, straight out of the Renaissance. They just took artist names from the Renaissance. So we're going to look here at a painting, a sculpture. This is his most famous sculpture. And this is just a sculpture of David and Goliath fame, which really shows the understanding of an artist in that time of the musculature and how the human body works. It's incredibly detailed, and it's carved out of marble or something equally difficult to work with, so you just can't even imagine how much tiny little knife work that took to do. But it's a great example of the understanding of the human body, how it works. There's nothing out of proportion about it, and if you look at some of the early sculptures, they don't necessarily look like that. And David is a biblical character, but he's not a king. Well, he does become a king later, I guess, but at this point, we're talking about David, the giant killer. So he's really kind of the little guy making the big step, and that's important. We'll talk about one other painter from the period of time who's important, and that is Titian, who is most famous for this painting called the Venus of Urbino, which is the standard reclining nude that you will see in paintings from henceforward. So we have a wonderful reclining nude here with a dog. We've seen those dogs come around before. This dog is right there keeping her company, so we'll assume that this is a dog of loyalty and faithfulness. We have people in the background, so this is not just a woman lying about. In fact, the story, as it tells you on the website, if you care to look at that, is that this is a painting that's supposed to teach this woman who's about to get married what her wifely duties are. So we're looking at even visual arts that we think of as just being a really lovely painting. It was really about education. This was a way to teach people who didn't necessarily read, but who were interested in bettering themselves. So that's our little quick trip through the Renaissance period. We've seen lots of exploration. We've seen some very famous artists coming out of this period. The big English writer of all time, Shakespeare. So important period of time. Now we'll take a look at how the music of that period comes about.